So let's dive in. I want to ask a couple questions right here at the beginning just to get us started, and you can sort of think about your answers for yourselves. Do you ever notice yourself or your team sidestepping real issues? How about soft-pedaling critical feedback? Or maybe avoiding conversations altogether? Lots of leaders and companies today admit to suffering from a culture of nice, where people are afraid to speak openly or confront the behavior of others for fear that they might rock the boat. Lots of leaders and companies are suffering from this, talking about this, and it's a little bit complicated because who doesn't want to be considered nice? Being nice is a worthy attribute, but when nice starts to define our company culture, now it's time to shift gears. A culture of nice lends itself to a host of challenges, including lack of trust, higher turnover, and lower productivity, none of which are actually nice at all. Instead, we want to be able to keep top talent, build trust, provide our employees with purpose, increase our value alignment, and help empower our teams to be as efficient as possible. So how do we do this? How do we cultivate a culture of strong, open communication where people are driving results in ways that strengthen relationships and build organizational trust? That's why you're here, right? Let's dive in. Here's our agenda for the next few minutes that we have together. First, I want to just talk about what is a culture of nice. We'll define and discuss it as well as look at some recent survey statistics that show just how prevalent this is and what it's costing us. Next, how did we get here? What's causing this terminal niceness in our organizations? And then what can we do about it? What are some simple and specific next steps that we can take to move from being a culture of nice to a culture of results? And then, as Holly mentioned, we'll have some time at the end to take questions and think this through a little bit together. So while most of us know intuitively that a healthy organizational culture is important to business success, there seems to be a bit of debate about what actually constitutes healthy. And at Fierce, we have the opportunity to speak with leaders around the globe. As we do this, it becomes very clear to us that there's an emerging trend in business today that might be contributing to this cultural debate around what healthy is. And that trend is being nice. When we ask leaders, how would you describe your culture? More and more often, we hear things like, everyone's always pleasant to each other, and still something just doesn't feel right. Turnover rates are high, and there seems to be a lot of tension in the air. For me, as a former HR professional, when I hear this, all the red flags go up. And the word nice doesn't seem nice at all. In truth, it concerns me. But before I go much further, let me validate a few things for us. You know, most of us were raised to be nice to others. We were taught to treat others with kindness and always play nice. Even in business, we use phrases like, kill them with kindness, or be a team player, or you can catch more flies with honey. So these childhood teachings and workplace anecdotes translate into the way in which we behave as adults, where we believe that being nice is good. But here's my question. Do you think that it's possible to be too nice? Now, we all know that too much of a good thing tends not to be a good thing. Ice cream, really good thing. Destroying a gallon of Rocky Road in one sitting, not so good. Sharing my opinions at work, a good thing. Being a person that never gives anybody else a chance to speak because I'm constantly running my mouth, not a good thing. The former CEO of the American Cancer Society, John Safran, once said, when managers are too nice, they're in fact not being nice at all. And he goes on to say they're actually doing a disservice to the people they manage. I want to pause with Sephron and dig in just a little bit to what this means. You know, being nice definitely has its pros in the workplace. Genuinely nice people are usually easy to work with. They have compassion and they care about others. They tend to have pretty upstanding values. They're good people. So what's the problem? What is Sephron saying about being too nice? Well, when someone is too nice in the workplace, their good traits take on some not so good qualities. Caring about others can lead to an avoidance of conflict or a failure to provide timely feedback when an individual is underperforming because we worry we might hurt their feelings, or worse, we may be seen as mean. The trait of being easy to work with can lead to the plight of never saying no to anything, not speaking up in a meeting, and never offering a dissenting opinion, even when that would be the responsible choice, because we worry that people will see us as difficult or not a team player. I'm guessing that these realities sound somewhat familiar to you, so I want us to take a quick poll around how you would describe organizational culture. 3 options here. One would be too nice. People say what others want to hear, not what needs to be said. We say yes far too often, and we avoid conflict like the plague. Second option would be just right. We're respectfully kind to each other, and we deal with issues clearly and directly as they arise, whether those are performance-related or otherwise. Third option, too aggressive. We could actually use a bit more nice around here. People don't shy away from conflict to the point that they're leaving mistrust, fear, and carnage in their path. So Holly, I'll turn it over to you. Would love to see how people are voting for themselves based on these 3 options. All right. So the numbers are adjusting a little bit, but we can see that currently 52% of people are saying that their culture suffers from too nice. We've got 35% that are just right. So I wish I knew who all of you were so that I could go hang out with you and learn what your secrets are. And then now we're up to 38. And then too aggressive are in the 12 to 13% category. So these numbers are going to keep shifting. Holly, if you want to take me back to the slide deck. I wonder how many of you wish that you could have just clicked on all 3. Because in truth, our culture is not made up of just one kind of person or one characteristic. We've got a whole plethora of people and issues and struggles and challenges in our organizations. It's messy because we're human. But regardless of how you answered this question today, my goal is to be able to share some tools that will help all of us be even more effective at healthy communication and this pursuit of balance between being nice and getting the results we want. Because the bulk of you focused on the too nice category, that's where I want to spend the bulk of my time today. And most of us are there in this world of too nice because we have all the right intentions. We care about our company. We want to build relationships with others. We don't want to hurt people's feelings. We want to be seen as agreeable, and we want to get results. So the question to ask is this: does our intent match our impact? Let me explain. Let's say someone refuses to talk with you about their workload being too much to handle because they want you to see them as a hard worker and a successful team player. But the reality is that their work is suffering because they just can't get to everything that's on their plate. Does their intent meet their impact in that scenario? No. Or perhaps you've been avoiding telling one of your salespeople or customer service reps that a particular client is unhappy with how they've been managing things because you don't want to upset him. You know he's been through some stressful times at home lately, and you just want to spare him the additional agony. But the result is that the account has been so challenging for this employee that now he is visibly stressed out every time you see him. And again, did I mention that the client is none too pleased? Does your intent meet or match your impact in that scenario? No. So what are we actually preventing when we avoid the conversations that need to take place? By avoiding conversation in an effort to be nice or to save someone from embarrassment, hurt, or frustration, we're actually guaranteeing more hurt and frustration. It becomes a vicious cycle. So let's look a little bit closer at what a culture of niceness or terminal niceness, love that phrase, is actually costing our organizations. We recently conducted a survey here at Fierce on exactly that topic, and here's what we found. 80%, 8 out of 10 full-time U.S. employees admit they keep their concerns to themselves because they want to be seen as nice by their colleagues and leadership. We can see this broken down by gender and by seniority within the organization, and the numbers actually remain pretty consistent across the board. 6 out of 10 employees say that they've been fearful of voicing a concern at work. And again, when we look at this breakdown, it's not all that different whether we're at entry level or C-suite. And though it's a little bit higher for women than it is for men, these numbers are remaining pretty constant across the board. Now, with statistics like these, we can already start calculating the prices that we're paying organizationally. And at the end of the day, there are 3 significant costs we bear when we have a culture of nice. The first one is top talent leaving. When a manager is too nice to an employee who isn't performing, or a peer refuses to give feedback to another peer that isn't pulling their weight, the bar for what is acceptable drops, and our talent pool follows. The employees who are performing well, or the colleagues who are taking on additional workload to make up for the lackluster performance of someone else, become frustrated, resentful, and demotivated. Relationships suffer, turnover is rampant, and the talent you are able to hold on to is typically those who are underperforming. There's very little growth and development, which leads us to cost number 2, low productivity. Employees who are never told what they're doing wrong or what they could do better because nice prevails, understandably believe they're doing great. And so they continue with the same behavior. And this leads to a plummet in productivity. Over time, again, because we don't want to upset the apple cart, we end up settling for mediocrity. Mediocre talent and mediocre work lead to mediocre results at best. And when we put these two together, talent leaving and low productivity, we start to see the third cost, time and money. Turnover and retention issues are so expensive. Rework, stalled initiatives, failed execution, unclear expectations, all of these are so expensive. The list is long, and every item hits our bottom line, which decreases our ability to generate the results we want for ourselves, for our organizations, and certainly for the people we serve. Russ Edelman is the president and CEO of Corridor Consulting, and he conducted a survey of 50 top CEOs. He asked them what the cost was to their business for being too nice, and collectively, the CEOs said that being nice was costing them roughly 8% of their gross revenues. So for a business making $1 million a year, that's $80,000. If you're making $10 million a year, that's $800,000. The inability to take initiative and stop avoiding tough conversations with managers or employees, actually the avoidance of those tough conversations, was causing their companies to miss out on opportunities that would have contributed significantly to the bottom line. In the end, being too nice causes talent to decline, relationships to suffer, productivity to plummet, trust to erode, and the bottom line to dwindle. This is so depressing, isn't it? So the question is, what's the anecdote? What do we do? Not the anecdote, antidote. That's what we need. We have plenty of anecdotes. It's having the conversations needed, not avoiding them. It's developing the skill and grace to say what needs to be said, not just what enables us to be seen as nice. It's being fierce. And what does that mean exactly? Well, here's our definition of a fierce conversation. It's one in which we come out from behind ourselves into the conversation and make it real. What does make it real mean to you? We would say that it's telling the truth, not avoiding the conversations that need to happen, being authentic and transparent, even vulnerable. And the costs of being unreal? Well, too much of the time, this is what we're engaged in. Conversations in which we're not saying what's on our minds, in which we're not telling the full truth, in which we're defaulting to nice. And I think if we're honest, we can acknowledge that being nice leans far more toward the unreal side of the spectrum than the real side. And as we've already seen, the costs are huge. At Fierce, we believe that conversations are the work of the leader and the workhorses of the organization, because what gets talked about, how it gets talked about, and who is invited to that conversation determines what will or won't happen. Great leaders know this. So they invite the real, open, honest conversations that are necessary to turn a culture of nice into a culture of results. That's the goal, to be sure. So what holds us back? Well, it's what we're not talking about. In Papua New Guinea, they have a word for this, for the things that we're not talking about, and they call these mokitas, that which everyone knows and no one speaks of. And they actually measure the health of the community based on the number of mokitas that exist within it. So the more mokitas, the less healthy the community. The fewer mokitas, the more healthy the community. And why would that be? Well, when we're not having the conversation, we carry that stress, that negative energy, that lack of authenticity around with us, which causes us to hold on to agendas, frustrations, things unsaid, which leads to less trust, less integrity, more anxiety, higher blood pressure, none of which is nice at all. You know, I'd encourage you later on, maybe as soon as this webinar has been completed, to take even a few minutes and write down the mokitas that come to your mind. What are the things that everybody knows but nobody's talking about at your workplace? Maybe even in your personal life. What are the elephants in the room? And then once you've written those down, ask yourself, what are these mokitas costing your organization, your team, your family? And maybe most important, what are these mokitas costing you? When we start to inventory the cost of mokitas, the price we pay for avoided or neglected conversation, it is perfectly clear that things need to change. How do we do that? How do we create organizational cultures, even families, that are open and honest, brave and courageous, vulnerable and transparent? The simple answer? By having the conversations needed instead of avoiding them, by choosing something other than nice. And at Fierce, we found that one of the best ways to do that is by remembering and applying this core idea: the conversation is the relationship. We sometimes think that we're having conversations about our relationships, whether that's with our coworkers or our direct reports or our boss, even at home. But in truth, the two are equal to one another. Think about it. If the conversation stops, you can do the math. The relationship stops as well. What I put into the conversation is what I get out of the relationship. If I put honesty, authenticity, and fun into my conversations, what will I get out of the relationship? Probably honesty, authenticity, and fun. If I withhold what I'm really thinking and feeling, chances are high that the people around me are doing the same. If you or I add one more thing to the list of topics we can't discuss because it will ruin a meeting at work or a weekend at home, it's not too long before all the possibilities for that relationship get smaller. The two people in the relationship get smaller. I get smaller and smaller until I'm not that much bigger than the space around my shoes, having 2 to 3 minute conversations that are completely empty of meaning. When I'm not having the conversations needed, it's the relationship that suffers because the conversation is the relationship. We had an engineer in one of our sessions a few years back who actually loved this idea because he realized that it was a formula, C equals R. And the beauty of this for me is that I can quickly diagnose exactly what's happening in every single relationship I'm in. If the relationship is not going well, I can ask myself, what are the conversations that are missing? What are the conversations that I'm avoiding? I can apply the math again and again and quickly see what it is that I need to do. We can take this formula one step further. C equals R and R equals C. The conversation is the relationship, and the relationships are the culture. So just as C equals R helps us to quickly diagnose what conversations are needed in relationships, R equals C helps us diagnose what is needed in our culture. Now, it's possible as you're listening that you're sitting there thinking, you know what, this sounds great, Ronna, but I can't change my whole corporate culture. I'm only one person. There isn't that much that I can do to make that kind of transformation. I get it, and here's the good news. Culture does not live outside of you. You are the culture. You choose it in the conversations you have or don't have. Even more, as a leader, and I use that word with no regard to title or pay grade, you model and reinforce culture every time you interact with others. People will follow your lead. If you are not having the conversations needed, neither will they. But the reverse is also true. The conversations you have equal the relationships you build, and the relationships you build equal the culture itself. Here's a really quick way to focus in on actionable strategic steps you can take right away in regards to your culture. Ask yourself, what kind of culture do I want to be a part of? And then, what does that require of me? When you ask and answer these two questions, you'll begin to see a difference right away. And just to make sure you see the results you're wanting, here's one more thing you can jot down and apply over and over again. If it is to be, it is up to me. Yes, there are some things that are out of your control, but not the conversations that are yours to have, which impact your relationships, which change your culture. If it is to be, it is up to me. So we've looked at how much conversations matter. We've acknowledged that we need to be having them instead of avoiding them. We understand that the conversations equal the relationships and that relationships equal our culture. And hopefully, we can all agree that choosing or defaulting to nice doesn't serve us. Now, what can we do to move from a culture of nice to a culture of results? What specific steps can we take? What actions can we step into? What specifically will create the change we need and want? Well, I'm glad you asked. That's what I want to be able to talk about. Each of us has a context filter. It's a lens through which we view and interpret everything that happens to us every single day, and it's made up of our opinions, our attitudes, and our beliefs. And when we hold on to these long enough, they become our truths with a capital T. We tend to reject or dismiss the things that don't align with our context, and we let in the things that validate it. And for the most part, it's completely subconscious. We don't even know that it's functioning. So here's an example. Can you think about a time when you really didn't like someone? I'm hoping that this was middle school, not yesterday, but I'll let you decide which example you want to work with. Now let's imagine that you found out that this person you don't like did something amazing. When you hear that news, what do you think? It's a total fluke. There's a catch. She tricked everybody. That information bounces off your context filter because it's not in alignment with your opinions, attitudes, and beliefs about this person. Now let's say somebody else comes to you and tells you something awesome that this person did. Now what do you think? Oh my gosh, she's fooled you too. And now I don't like you either. This bounces off your context filter as well. You reject what you've heard because it doesn't align with your lens, your perspective. Now, third example, imagine that you find out that this person that you don't like failed miserably at something. Now what do you think? See, I told you, it was only a matter of time. This makes it right through your context filter because it does align with your opinions, attitudes, and beliefs. You were right. Here's the thing. It's pretty easy to prove yourself right. If you believe the world is a horrible place, you can find all kinds of data to back that up. If you believe the world's a miracle, you can find all kinds of data to back that up as well. You can justify any context you hold. So I'm not all that interested in whether or not you're right. What I am interested in is whether or not you're getting the results that you want, individually and as an organization. So let me repeat what I just said. It's not about whether or not you can justify your context, whether or not you're right. It's about whether or not you're getting the results you want. So let's look really closely at how this context is playing out when it comes to a culture of nice. Here's my potential context. I can't say what I really want to or what I really need to because I'd be seen as mean or insensitive or too opinionated. I'll be misunderstood and things will get worse instead of better. Besides, the other person can't handle it. I think nice is the safer bet. Now, because that's my context, what do I assess or notice around me? Well, I see other people who've been more blunt or truthful and things didn't go so well for them. I see my colleagues sidestepping the real issues. I see that leadership avoids talking about what needs to be named. More of those mojitos. I hear the talk at the water cooler or the coffee machine when people say what they really think and feel, but in meetings, they're so nice. And if these are the things I assess, what are my emotions? Probably frustration, anxiety, fear, maybe apathy. And if those are my emotions, what will my behavior be? Well, I'm not going to speak up, except over margaritas after work when I say what I really think. I'm not going to tell the truth, and I'm not going to demonstrate courage, and I'm probably not going to be fierce. And if that's the behavior that I demonstrate, what will the results be? More of the same. more avoidance of the conversations needed, more niceness, which my context and causes me to say, see, I'm right. I can't really speak my mind. It's this self-perpetuating loop. Our context impacts our results over and over again. So what if we used our understanding of context to get different results? Let's try this one more time. Let's look at our context a different way. What if I were to say something like this? It's true, we do have a culture of nice, but I realize that I need to start demonstrating a bit more courage and truth-telling. Ronna said that the conversation is the relationship and the relationships are the culture, so if it is to be, it's up to me. Well, now what do I assess? Well, I actually spot more opportunities in which I can at least try to speak my mind. I acknowledge that I have coworkers to whom I could give feedback so they can perform better. I sit in meetings and realize that I could actually offer my opinion even if it's not popular. And what do I feel? Well, I'm still a bit afraid, but I'm also curious and intrigued, maybe even slightly hopeful. And my behavior? Well, I risk. I try. I have conversations instead of avoiding them. They're not perfect, but I'm making progress. And the results? The caliber of my conversations change. Relationships change. And bit by bit, over time, the culture changes. You can do this for yourselves, maybe even later today. You could take a screenshot of this slide, then go back to those moquitas that I asked you to write down, those elephants in the room, that stuff that everybody knows but nobody's talking about, whether at work or at home. You could pick even one of them and walk yourself through this context results cycle. How is that moquita, that thing you're not talking about, impacting your context, what you notice, your emotions, your behavior, and your results, or lack thereof? Then go through it a second time. This time, shift your context. What if that moquita didn't exist? What if you named it instead of avoiding it? What if you were having the conversations needed with courage and skill? What would your new context be? Now what would you assess and notice? What would you feel? How would you behave? And what results would you experience? How about your teams? How about the company as a whole? When we recognize the power of our context and then choose curiosity over justifying ourselves, we get different and far better results. Even more, we begin to recognize and acknowledge that everyone else has a context filter too that's completely different than our own. When we let go of our need to be right about our opinions, our attitudes, our experiences, and our beliefs, we shift from a culture of nice to a culture of results. And when we recognize the way in which our context, especially around the idea of being nice, is impacting our results, our conversations, our relationships, and our culture, now we have the ability to change it, to change everything. I want to give you one super simple context shift that you could make immediately. What if we replaced being nice with being in service? This is a tiny shift with monumental results. When being in service instead of nice is our context and focus, we don't avoid conversations. Instead, we step into them with intention and purpose. When being in service is our context and focus, instead of nice, we are far more willing to give constructive feedback, knowing that it will develop and strengthen our direct reports or our peers. When being in service is our context and focus instead of nice. We demonstrate the needed courage and strength to express our opinion or perspective in a meeting without watering it down or worrying about how we'll be perceived, because we no longer feel the need to walk on eggshells. And finally, remember this. While no single conversation is guaranteed to change the trajectory of a career, a company, a relationship, or a life, any single conversation can. Any single conversation can. The whole organization does not have to be on board. I need to be on board. The whole culture doesn't have to change. I need to change. And every bit of this happens one conversation at a time. I am 100% certain that if I were able to sit down with you one-on-one and I were to ask you, tell me a story about one particular conversation that completely changed the trajectory of your career or a relationship or your life, you'd be able to tell me that story. Any single conversation has the capacity to create that story for you and certainly for someone else. So let's review where we've been these last few minutes, some tips and takeaways that you can take with you and start applying right away. Ask yourself, does my intent match my impact? When I think about being nice, am I in alignment? Does my intent match my impact? Name mojitos instead of avoiding them. What are those elephants in the room, and how do we get them up on the table instead of shoving them under the rug? Remember, C equals R. The conversation is the relationship, and the relationships equal the culture. Practice saying and then living, if it is to be, it is up to me. Be curious. Is your context, that lens, those opinions, attitudes, and beliefs that you hold, getting you the results you want and need? And if not, how might you shift your context in order to get different results? And then finally, replace being nice with being in service. You know, that's a lot. That's a lot of stuff that we've covered. And summing it up, I want to say this. You know, when real, open, transparent conversations happen, when employees and leaders come together to share their perspective, ask critical questions, tackle the tough challenges, and actually have the conversations needed instead of avoiding them, then together we build a shared culture with increased engagement and so much more accountability. And at the end of the day, we shift from a culture of nice to a culture of results. It's my hope that these past few minutes have given you even a bit more courage and encouragement to just start, to step into single conversations, one at a time, to be brave, to get rid of the mojitos, to say what needs to be said, to be in service instead of defaulting to nice, and to watch how contexts, conversations, relationships, and cultures change when you do. That's being fierce. So I'm going to throw it over to Holly, and we're going to step into any questions that you might have.
All right, Ronna, thanks so much. And so we do have quite a bit of time left for questions and answers. Folks, if you've got questions for Ronna, please go ahead and get those over to us. First question of the afternoon comes from Kelsey. So Ronna, can you give us a practical way in which we could start to name the mojitos in our organization?
This is such a good question, and it's so hard. Like, we know it's something that we need to do, but the how-to sometimes evades us. My thinking around this particular question is that even the exercise of acknowledging that we have the mojitos is the starting place. So what if in your next team meeting, you just identified this idea of moquitas, explain what they are, that which everyone knows and no one speaks of, and you let everybody take 2-3 minutes just to jot down what those are. What are the moquitas that come to mind? And they can do that totally privately. They don't have to share their lists. They can just write them down for themselves. Then have a conversation together as a team, and again, this doesn't have to be more than 3 to 5 minutes, about what the cost of those moquitas are for the organization as a whole, for your individual teams and departments, for you individually, professionally, and just having the conversation about the costs, about the fact that the moquitas exist in and of themselves, begins to open up the space and the safety for us to actually acknowledge what the moquitas are. And that's what we need first. We just need the conversational space in which we can come to the table and acknowledge that these things exist. What if we had the space and the time and the courage to name those together? Not me being the lone crusader out there who constantly has to be the brave one, but all of us together in a contained and safe context. I hope that's a good idea, or one that you can at least start implementing right away.
All right, Ronna, thank you so much. How about a question from Elizabeth now? She says, I understand the idea of if it is to be, it is up to me. But still, what can I do about people above me? She says, I can't change leadership. They're not up to me.
Yeah, this is so hard. I totally hear this, and I hear this a lot when I'm out training fierce content. I get this, Ronna. I understand the part of this that's mine, and at the end of the day, I'm not in charge. I've got leaders who are not on board with this, or this is super risky for me to manage up, to step into these conversations with people who are further up the food chain from me. I do not disagree. It is risky. It does take a lot of courage. And the question that I often ask when this comes up is, what happens if you don't do anything? What's it costing you to not say what needs to be said? And when we start to inventory that, and I'll just speak for myself, when I start writing out the list of all the stuff that's making me crazy because I can't speak about the things that need to be said because I'm fearful of what would happen if I stepped up a notch and had the conversation with someone above me, the list gets super long, and I start to recognize that it's too costly not to say something. The second thing I would add to this as maybe just a tool for when you do begin to have the conversations with people above you is to start out by saying something like this. If I knew that my behavior was making somebody crazy, I would want to know that. I'm assuming and frankly trusting that the same is true for you. That's why I'm coming to you, manager, department head, supervisor, boss, because I trust that you would want to know the things that I know, the things that I'm experiencing, the things that I'm hearing, so that you could address them just the way that I would want to know if it was me. So I get it. I know that this is so hard for us to step into personal agency and personal responsibility when we can only do so much and we only sit at a certain place of responsibility or leadership. And I cannot emphasize enough just the power that occurs and the impetus for change that starts to take place when we make even the smallest steps of moving into those conversations a bit at a time with the people around us and the people above us. I just so hope you'll have the courage to step forward and see what happens when you step out in that way.
All right, great. Thanks, Ronna. Next question comes from Gary. So do you think being nice and being kind are the same thing? And if not, what's the difference?
Yeah, I love that. So I wish I could ask you, Gary, if you think that the two are the same. Is being nice and being kind the same? My answer would be they're not the same. I think kind means that I can tell you the truth. Nice might mean that I don't think you can handle it. I think being kind means that I'm honest enough to give you feedback in the moment when I see or hear something that I know is going to be to your detriment or the team's detriment. Whereas nice means I'm afraid to say that to you because I don't know how you'll react or how you'll respond or what you'll think of me. Being kind means that I have the courage in a meeting to name what maybe all of us are thinking that nobody is saying. That is kind. That is generous. Being nice means that I'm going to withhold my thoughts, my opinions, because I don't think that the rest of the group is ready to have the discussion or somebody's going to disagree with me. So I think they're totally different. And if we think back to what I was talking about right at the end, I would say that kind is very closely connected to being in service. If kind is my motivation, then of course I want to be in service to the people around me, to my direct reports, to my peers, and based on the last question, even to the people above me, certainly to my clients and my customers, to the organization as a whole, and if I drill this way down, to my family, to the people that I'm in relationship with on a day-to-day basis. So I'm all for kind. Nice is what gets us into trouble.
All right, thank you again, Ronna. So Kevin has shared a situation with us, and we'll see what you have to say about it. Kevin says, my senior HR leader acknowledges our nice culture, but is not open to addressing it because the manager is concerned employees will react negatively. So what do you have to say about Kevin's situation?
Well, first, I'm sorry. Second, you're not alone. I was just at a client site last week where this was almost exactly the same thing that I was hearing. Yeah, we get it. This is what's going on, and we don't want to, upset the apple cart or ruffle too many feathers by beginning to name this. And I have to say, this is why I'm glad that I work for Fierce, and this is my shameless plug for Fierce. This is where, we so deeply desire to be able to step in and build not only the awareness and the acknowledgement of the need for this kind of training and these kinds of conversations, but even more importantly, the actual skill sets. I think that all of us organizationally, and your HR department is a good example of this, know that this is the stuff we need to take on. The question is the how-to. We can, talk about this till the cows come home, but do we actually have models and processes and muscle that we can build and repeat and sustain over time that will begin to move the needle on this stuff? So in the absence of that, what I would be encouraging you to begin to do is two things. One is I go right back to what I said before. What can you do even if HR isn't on board? Where is your sphere of influence? What are the conversations that you can start to have that will actually start to make a difference within the scope or the team or the department or the people with whom you live and work? And the second suggestion that I would make in lieu of Fierce, or if you didn't have us in your building or in your culture, would be to actually start looking for some tools that you can use that will build your own conversational muscle, whether that's around feedback or confrontation or how to step into one-on-one conversations, how to build accountability, any tools, specific processes that we can start to use even one-on-one, not to mention with our teams and then organizations as a whole, it's just exponential, the change that begins to be created when we start practicing what we preach and really start to move forward with the actionable steps. So hopefully that will get you started and provoke some more thought.
All right, Ronna. And then, in addition, for those tools on how to have the tough conversations, question from Steve is, how would you get others comfortable having conversations about topics that are very uncomfortable?
Yeah. Well, I go back to what we were talking about before with mojitos. I think sometimes the reason that the conversations are so difficult is because we're not having them, and we tend to build up a story in our minds that if we were to have them, everything's going to go badly, or the other person can't handle it. And what I wonder about is whether or not that's true. Is that maybe just my context? I go back to that context results cycle. What if I held a different context? What if I gave somebody else the benefit of the doubt or made the leap that they, like me, do actually want to be able to have a difficult conversation? They just don't know how, and they don't know how to start. So what if I were the person who was brave, who with vulnerability and transparency went to the other person that I need to have the difficult conversation with, or that both of us are avoiding the difficult conversation, and just started out by saying exactly that. I haven't brought this to your attention because I have been afraid of how you might respond. Or I haven't talked to you about this because I've been afraid for myself, and I really don't want to keep this under wraps. I really don't want there to be stuff that we're not talking about. So this is going to be messy. I'm not going to do this perfectly. I don't have all the answers, but I also want to get this on the table because I trust that the two of us, or the four of us, or the 20 of us, or the 100 of us together, if we actually name this stuff, could start to move the needle toward the results we actually desire. So we start. That's what we do. No matter how difficult, no matter how scary, we take the initiative, we acknowledge that, and we remember any single conversation has the capacity to change everything. How do I just step into it as gracefully as I can, recognizing that it won't be perfect, believing that if I actually move forward and name what needs to be named, that in and of itself is going to make a difference.
All right, good advice there, Ronna. Thanks. And so I think we'll have time for one more question today. This one comes from Dan. Could you provide the very first step people could take if they're still afraid to speak up, even if there is some understanding of this in the organization?
Yeah, two thoughts come to mind. One is I would wonder if there is another person within the organization that you could form kind of an accountability partnership with. Not so that the two of you can gossip together about all the stuff that's not being talked about. That's just going to create a new problem. But could you find a person that you trust who has the same concerns or desire for change within the organization that you do, and just agree together? Here's an example. We're going to be in a meeting next week. I know you're going to be in the meeting with me, and I really need to be held accountable to say at least one thing that I normally avoid saying. Will you please prompt me to say that if I don't come up with it on my own? Or I really need to be able to say something to my boss about something that happened last week and I've been avoiding it. I'm going to get that done by Wednesday, close of business. Would you please check in with me Thursday morning? Or could we get together for lunch on Wednesday afternoon so that I can think through how I'm going to discuss this? What if we began to ask for support from other people in the organization? Again, not to commiserate, but to hold us accountable, to brainstorm with us as to how we could step forward, and to then report back on the movement that we've made. The second idea that comes to my mind is not involving another person, but is really personal, and that is even journaling out or talking yourself through that context results cycle that I had up in that slide. I do this for myself all the time. I write out, what is the context that I'm holding? I can't talk to so-and-so because the whole thing is going to go badly. All right, well, if that's what I believe, what am I noticing? Well, I'm noticing all the subtle cues that make me think that if I were to say something, she's going to go off the deep end. And if these are the things that I notice, what do I feel? I feel afraid. I write all this out for myself. And then I make myself write it a second time, shifting my context, which might be super uncomfortable for me. It might require me to have to think about this in a way that doesn't feel natural, that feels really counterintuitive. But I force myself to walk through the process a second time, just me, myself, and I, so that I can see what the result would be on the other end. And that encourages me both to see what those ideas and beliefs and emotions and attitudes are that I'm holding on to that aren't serving me, and it gives me the courage to step forward in a new way. So accountability and then a personal reflective process, both of those super helpful in the absence of kind of organizational models or processes that we're working with as a whole.
All right, great. And that will take us to the bottom of our hour for the day. So, folks, this webcast has been approved for HRCI and SHRM credit. Give us just about 24 hours, then head on over to your My HCI profile. Hover over that drop-down menu and head to your My Learning Journey to download your transcript. One more big thank you to Fierce, to Ronna, and for you for being with us today. We hope everyone has a great one.